state network. And as expected, it closes, but almost immediately opens. The building and the floor shudder. The lights dim. The operator only knows that the exercise has failed, but he doesn't know why. He knows that he must now make the generating unit safe. Have the systems that had to shut down done so automatically? Had those systems crucial to the safe rundown of the turbine remained in service or started as required? To the ashen-faced people at the back of the control room, the quiet calm of a few seconds ago is replaced by alarms sounding and alarm annunciators flashing. The operator asks if somebody will go out and see what's going on. On the way, one of the assistants replies as he and others rush out the door to assess the situation on the plant. Now, investigations were carried out and a serious electrical problem was discovered. This was corrected and a second attempt to synchronise the unit was successfully carried out later that evening. The unit was subsequently taken out of service to allow a more detailed inspection of the turbine and generator. The major problem found was that there were some 20 coupling bolts between the turbine and the generator. They had been partly sheared. Now, these things are not small. They both weigh, one weighs about 58 tonnes and the other one about 56 tonnes. So they're not small bits of gear. But this particular startup and all those that followed showcased the criticality of getting a generator online. But not that it was realised at that time, but this first failure partly foreshadowed the station's future. Now, many people that I interviewed told me that every day at Liddell was different. There always seemed to be a crisis. It was a very hands-on type of power station. And in Liddell's 52 years of operation, March 26, 1981 was another auspicious day, but not for a milestone of achievement, but because that day heralded the start of the station's worst 8 months. 3 of Liddell's 4 500 megawatt generators failed for similar reasons. The subsequent power restrictions in New South Wales were the first significant technology-related ones since the late 1940s and the early 1950s. So between 1950 and 1994, the Electricity Commission of New South Wales acquired or built 23 major coal-fired stations. And of these, Liddell was the 18th or in the fourth generation. Before 1963, power stations were acquired from organisations as Sydney County Council and the New South Wales Government Railways. Wales Point A on the Central Coast was the Commission's first major power station. That was in 1963. And Mount Piper out near Lithgow was its last in 1994. But having said that, they did build 4 small stations during the early 1950s power crisis. These were at Port Kembla, the Walker Waterworks near Maitland, Casula near Liverpool and Penrith. Now, interestingly, the last 2 have been repurposed. The one at Liverpool is now the Casula Arts Centre and the one at Penrith is the Museum of Fire. And of course, Sydney's Ultimo Power Station is now the Powerhouse Museum. So when I interviewed people for this Liddell history that I wrote, I asked them for 3 words or 3 phrases that best describe their Liddell experience. Hot and cramped and dirty. I remember dirty. Over the years, Liddell people have had to accept change to keep the station viable. Some commented on the personal independence and responsibilities they had to take on. Many made lifelong friends, and some have a great passion for the power station. I suppose like any workplace, there was great camaraderie. But on the other hand, a few people thought it was a sad working environment. Former Labor Senator Doug Cameron was a union delegate there in the mid-70s, and he recalled the industrial warfare of his time. But the best comments were that Liddell was known as Lakeside Discounts or the warehouse by the lake. Now, I'm not sure what that meant. A few chuckles around the table. Obviously, people know what that meant.
BHP foreign orders.
Yes, yeah, that'll be about it. As I said, crisis plagued Liddell, and it furrowed the brows of many who worked there. But on the other hand, many revelled in its complexities, to the point one engineer and other power station tragics thought it a serious toy to play with. Then others saw Liddell as only a means to earn money. One respected supervisor Riley saw the station as a place to while away his time before and after a stint of lunchtime lakeside carp fishing. But that was before the lake became toxic. The electricity that Liddell generated had a transformational effect on the local and state economies and society. She certainly significantly impacted the landscape both visually and environmentally. And she influenced the lives of many millions of people over the decades, and more directly, the lives of thousands of people who worked there. Now, Liddell's first generator was removed from service on the 1st of April last year. I don't think that meant anything, but on the first day of April, but anyway. In the last week of April this year, just 6 weeks ago, 3 generating units were taken out of service for the last time. Of those 3, probably the second one on the Wednesday was perhaps the most emotional for those involved. The shift manager on that day commented that when he walked out onto the plant to manually take the unit out of service, he realised the enormity of what he was doing. He noticed that his footsteps slowed instinctively, just like walking into a funeral. On that last day, the Friday, it wasn't as bad. The emotion was out of it. They just had a job to do. So the final generator's output was reduced over an 8-hour period so that the last of the coal and the oil was used up. They were trying to switch her life support systems off so she could go by herself. But she refused 15 minutes. It kept going on for longer than they had expected. And in that, it was a bit sad. Generally, the units trip out of service before then, but this time she just didn't want to go. Eventually, the output got to 0 megawatts, but it stayed connected to the grid. Now, they couldn't let that go on, so a decision was made to deliberately take it out of service before it became a very large motor drawing power from the grid. For the shift manager at the time, it was a tough decision. He commented, and the shift manager in the photograph on the right-hand side is the guy furthest away with the dark glasses. He's the guy that's telling me this. He had some sort of awareness that there were, for some important people watching what was going on. You can see the crowd in the room. He'd been told not to swear, but he had a job to do, so his concentration went there. Yet he did tell one of his fellows, "Don't start crying." because if you do, we'll all follow. People started applauding, handshakes all around, backs were slapped. Some eyes may have been close to tears. Now, Damien Nix, AGL CEO, he's one of the guys in that group, made a bit of a speech. But for the operators in the room, even though they had taken generators out of service on numerous occasions, this time was different. There were some quietly spoken words of, well done, we did good, we're done here. In the end, it was a bit of relief that it was over. There wasn't a sense of accomplishment or that they had done anything outstanding. Now, through the magic of the internet, I was at home and I watched the numbers decline. But why did I feel sad? I felt it inside me. And I don't know what the right word is. Sad's not the right word. Reflective, no, that's not the right word. But why were there these varied reactions from me and the people working there to shutting down this machine and what had once been Australia's largest power station? It's just a power station. It's just a machine. I suppose we get attached to places. We get attached to our memories of what happened there over the decades. We probably might be saddened by the loss of social contact at work. We remember what we did there. And in my case, that was over 40 years ago. Or maybe it was 6 years of researching this history of the place. In the weeks just gone, it's interesting the number of people who felt a need to post on Facebook comments such as, yesterday I packed up my desk and walked out of Liddell for the last time. Don't listen to the politicians that advocate that Liddell should stay open. Now, I'm not going to name any names because I'll probably get in court over that, but anyway. These guys are pushing a different barrow. But as far as Liddell itself is concerned, they just don't know. People who operate the place told me that it was technically old and had to close. Lady Liddell, they said, was being asked to run a marathon and she was just not up to it. And finally, we're familiar with the opinions of politicians, the media and special interest groups. However, as former AGL Macquarie General Manager Kate Coates wrote in the history book, nearly 52 years is a testament to the plant, but more profoundly to Liddell's people. And that's Liddell. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ken.
Questions?
Ken, I'd imagine over the 52 years of the life of it, there've been quite a few upgrades as well.
Their major upgrade was in the late 90s, early 2000s of a control system. That's the major one that I can think of.
If somebody, a politician, for instance, wanted to keep it going, would it be difficult to get the components to upgrade it to a major degree?
Probably, but nobody was prepared to spend the money. AGL decided in 2017 to take it out of service for environmental reasons. Later on, as it came closer towards today, economics might have come into it. Whether it was making any money in the end, I'm not sure. But you've got to remember, that when AGL bought the place in 2013, some around there, they bought it for $0, effectively $0. But they've put in lots and, millions and millions of dollars into it. But at this point in time, it was old. It took a lot of work to keep it going. Yeah.
Who owned it before AGL?
Pacific Power, the Electricity Commission of New South Wales, us.
So it
Us.
was a public.
The people.
You're saying at one stage it was an incredibly noisy place to work as well.
Power stations are noisy.
Ken, National Trust.
Yep.
I was just wondering, will the power station be repurposed in some fashion? And is there any interest in retaining the stacks for interpretive reasons?
Well, AGL said they're going to repurpose the site into an energy hub, big batteries and a whole other range of industries up there. Hopefully that'll happen. I doubt very much whether the stacks will remain. It'll be like Munmora, cleared to the ground.
What about the toxicity of the lake? Did they do anything to try and improve that? Could
I
they?
don't know. We don't know.
Were they
The ash dams, how big are they, and are there any proposals to, or is that being used by adjacent power stations?
I think it's being used by Bayswater.
Yeah. It's of course it started the complete change of the Hunter Valley. Not only with the pollution from the stack, made a big difference. The mines, the open cut mines, and how they were brought to the mine, how the coal was.
By a conveyor belt.
Yes. It's a whole new way of creating power, wasn't it? It was a big stage in New South Wales development.
Well, it certainly brought a lot of development to the Upper Hunter. I think that's probably more so through the mines.
Yes.
Certainly the mines produce coal for the power station, but the mines also produce coal to go out through the Port of Newcastle.
Yeah. Well, that came later, didn't it, really? It was originally, it was a big change because actually the lake had to be
Made. That's right.
And the railways altered, the roads changed positions. It was a big change.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, Ken, the emotional thing about seeing these things, these big sort of places closed down, is your book the only sort of artefact that remembers the site, or? Because remember in 1999 when BHP shut down, BHP financed artists, dramatists, historians to write histories of almost every single department of the place. They had a big sort of going out. Like they should have had this every year, really, because it was a fantastic way of celebrating.
Memorials now.
Yeah, well, that's right. It's a different kind of memorial.
Well,
So we're segueing, Nicholas.
The books are still in the library, and the muster point installation, fantastic installation, just near, the old BHP site, is still there, though it is now enclosed by a fence with barbed wire and locks.
Yeah.
So because I think people had started doing graffiti on it, but it is that you have to go on guided tours now. That's worth seeing. Have you seen that?
Oh, yes, I know very well.
To give AGLs their due, they've engaged an arts group, arts society from Muswellbrook, who have done various interpretive arts things and whatever. I'm not sure exactly why. the Powerhouse Museum employed a photographer about 2 or 3 months ago to go through the place, photographs, interview people, etc., etc. So eventually that will be certainly at the Powerhouse Museum, or hopefully online as well. So they haven't just walked away from it. Hopefully, as the place is demolished, they will. Oh, it's another one of those memorials, isn't it?
That's right.
We're not allowed to. No, not allowed to talk about memorials.
Yes, you are.
Oh, right. Have some remembrance there of what was there, because you just 52 years, just can't wipe it off the board.
All right. Any other Zoom impressions or anything? Because I can't see everyone, but I'll just keep going. Well, look, speaking of memorials, went to a very exciting gathering on Saturday afternoon on Raising Your Voice. It was talking back to monuments, which is a community forum that was held at the Uni Gallery. So there were presentations from artists on reimagining monuments using digital arts. There were also insights from 2 First Nations presenters into the critique of statues. So Nicholas did a fantastic introduction to Professor Bronwyn Carlson, who delivered just an incredible presentation, which knocked us all around, I think. It was just amazing. And it was the launch, was it, of the book?
Yes,
Yeah, it was the launch of
local launch.
Monumental
Launched it elsewhere,
Disruptions.
yeah.
So, Nicole Chaffee spoke about the 3D digitisation of the fishing tree that's currently in the museum, and they want to install a digital representation of this thing in the Marook Cultural Centre. So it was a great afternoon. I don't think we spent enough time discussing it. I think it needs a whole session in the Civic Theatre, I think. But anyway, today we have the 3 organisers, Associate Professor Nancy Cushing, Nicholas, who's in the room with us. Nancy is on Zoom, and Dr. Irene Perez-Lopez is also through Zoom. So over to you guys.
Thanks so much, Johnny. Now, Nick, how are we going to do this? Is it best if I share my screen from this end?
Yeah, sounds good.
All right, I will do that. So we've put together a kind of a précis, I guess, of what people heard and saw on Saturday to share with you today. So I'm going to start, and then I think I'll pass over to Nick, and then Irina will be the third presenter. And we thought we'd each talk for about 5 minutes to just guide you through what we were doing. So as Johnny said, this was called Raise Your Voice, a community forum on talking back to monuments. And we were really pleased to be in the University Gallery. Gillian Shaw is such a great hostess over there. And here was the plan for the day. So we were really lucky to have a welcome to country from Shelley Smith, who's from architecture. And she talked about Dangar Park and the move to rename that park, which is probably something that's come before this group before. Then I spoke a bit about a project that the 3 of us have been working on with some artists, and I'll say more about that. And then we did hear from Nicole Chaffee, had the launch of Bronwyn Carlson's book, and then some discussion at the end. So that was the plan for the day. I think I have spoken to you before also about my interest in monuments being that I didn't come in through the kind of decolonial avenue, but through my environmental history interests. And it was this monument in Newcastle East, which really made me think, do monuments have an endless lease on public space? Should they, or are we allowed to change our minds about some things and then potentially think about making changes to monuments, which may mean reinterpreting them, it may mean moving them to another spot, like to a museum, or even to a statue park, which is what's happened in a lot of Eastern European countries. So it was the coal monument that set it all off. And from that developed this project about reimagining Newcastle's James Fletcher statue. And so we decided that, you know, in thinking about how you could make changes to monuments, that we would involve some mid-career artists in that project, because artists have a long history as iconoclasts, both in knocking down statues and breaking replicas of statues apart, in reinterpreting them, as we've seen with some of the work that particularly by Indigenous artists in Australia. And so the one on the left is a replica, and the one on the right was under terms offered by Hobart City Council that they could make changes, but they had to be reversible as part of a sort of a thought experiment. Or you could move right away from the object itself and do things on reproductions, actually as that previous one of Captain Crook was, or virtually. And so this is virtual graffiti that some Mexican women were placing on monuments there. So we thought, what about a project where we try to increase agency in civic space, but keep it accessible, keep it democratic, by building up a process and a toolkit for modifying monuments without actually harming the physical monument. And we thought that didn't necessarily have to be the end of the line, just sort of playing around with something online, but that you could use that as a way for people to express their views. And if there was a groundswell of momentum against a particular statue, then maybe that could be transferred into real life as well. And that was the sort of process that was undertaken by Hobart City Council, and they have decided to remove their Crowther statue because of its negative associations with really atrocities against Aboriginal people. So we looked around Newcastle, and of course there aren't that many statues to choose from. We weren't going to go near a war memorial, that was for sure. And we found dear James Fletcher standing in his park, looking out over the ocean, over the entry to the harbour in 1900, staring into somebody's third-story window in 2022. But he's still there. So we thought, well, what if we engage some artists to restory or reinterpret, recontextualize this statue of James Fletcher, who you probably know was a Scottish immigrant during the gold rushes, lived and worked in Newcastle, was a coal miner, a coal union organizer, later a coal mine owner, a member of parliament, and the owner of the Newcastle Morning Herald. And his statue was erected in 1897 because people liked him, because they thought highly of him and wanted to have that statue in place. So we went through a process where we made a photogrammetry, three-dimensional image of this statue. And this is what it looks like. It's available on this platform, Sketchfab. And so you can go in and move it around. You can flip him on his head or spin him around. It's available for everybody to use now. But we wanted our artists to go a little bit further. And so they worked with both a three-dimensional model and images and also a 3D printed version of James Fletcher. So one of our artists was Fiona Lee, and she really took up that sort of idea of the environmental impact of coal. And so here she has a giant James Fletcher looking down from his position on the hill at the ruins of Bar Beach after the sand has been taken away. A second artist we had was an Indigenous artist, Travis DeBreeze, and he did some really interesting, is it virtual reality, Nick?
This is augmented reality.
Augmented reality. I always get my realities mixed up. But anyway, so you can online, you can go in and make this dynamic and have him being sort of enveloped in smoke or in burning embers and so on. It's really quite cool. And then, oh, it works on the slide too. I hope you're seeing that. So again, recontextualizing the statue. Now, a third artist, Tian Baker, became very interested in these little creatures and their teeth. which when you go exploring for for petroleum, you often find these little animals, prehistoric animals, and that's a marker for where you're going to find the sort of, the greenhouse gas generating type resources. And so here she's done a virtual application over the statue, coating him in the teeth of this creature. So you can probably tell I've forgotten its name.
Conodont.
Say it again.
Conodont.
Conodont, of course. And we promised that people would probably have nightmares about the Conodont coming to get them after the presentation. So we were really thrilled with all of the ideas that these artists came up for us about what you could do with a statue. But we did find that where we wanted it to be very democratic and something that anybody could do sitting at home at their computer, we found that without the sort of skill sets that they had and without assistance from an absolute expert in this area of manipulating three-dimensional images, it was going to be very difficult. So we're still working on that, and I'll come back to that at the end. But now I'll hand over to, is it Nick or Urbana who's going to speak about this one?
It's me. Hi, everyone. Nice to see you. I couldn't do it in person, I'm sorry. So we first had Nicole presenting the amazing work that she's doing as a curator or director of the Murrock Gallery. She was talking about the process that they are currently underpinning on the fishing tree, which is a tree she mentioned should be nowadays 300 to 400 years old, and it was used by the Worimi people in the daily hunting and fishing activities until it was destroyed or burned or kind of destroyed by vandals in 2001. So in 2022, the Worimi Land Council, proposed and start the scanning, so the photogrammetry of the tree itself, to kind of preserve it. And her presentation was really exciting because although she's a Worimi person, it's still Aboriginal land and it's the same land, right? So I think there is also a strong connection within the work she's doing, obviously. I remember a highlight point when she mentioned, and then when we scanned, the tree came back to life. And she was pretty excited about the idea. So then she introduced us in the whole process, the very challenging process of underpinning the photogrammetry itself and creating the mesh, and then working through the artificial kind of intelligence project. What's this called? Not artificial intelligence, is the like the virtual reality, the virtual reality project that they are currently working on, which is very exciting. She was also mentioning all the technical complexity that is behind the technical people that is kind of supporting the project. And I think that kind of very well connect with, we didn't have as Johnny was mentioning before, the time to really go deep into the conversation and the feedback, because it could be a great opportunity to discuss the role that all this virtual reality can have in preserve the heritage. And that will very well connect with Shelley Smith's PhD and project that she's currently underpinning on the one hand, and on the other, how virtual reality or how photogrammetry can really be the body of this transformation that we were discussing in the forum. So I think that that's the highlights. So those are part of the imaginary that they are creating within the museum exhibition. And yeah, it was a really kind of exciting presentation on Michelle, on Nicole, presentation, sorry.
Thanks, Abhinav. Okay, and then the third section was Nick first talking about this book by Bronwyn Carlson, and then then her responding to that and talking a bit about what she was trying to do. So I'll hand over to Nick. And Nick, do you want to do one of those beep or something when you want me to change the slide?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is it coming through okay online, the sound?
Yes.
Yes, I'm having no trouble hearing people.
Wonderful. Well, yeah, my role on Saturday was to really introduce Bronwyn, Professor Bronwyn Carlson, and it was quite, I think, a coup to have Bronwyn there with us. I'll get to a little bit more background who Bronwyn is. Would you like to put the book cover on, Nancy?
I'd love to.
Yeah, so in February, Bronwyn Carlson and Terry Farrelly published this book through Aboriginal Studies Press, which is a publisher based at IATSIS in Canberra. It comes after several articles by the two authors exploring the monumental in Aboriginal settler relations, but it goes further than those previous two articles. They go beyond statues. They talk also about national flags, anthems, anniversaries, written history. So I think they're right in, if you notice in the subtitle, colonial commemorations. That's really the gist of the book. I think also, in a sense, and obviously I look at this in a positive sense, the force of the book cover is very much towards Aboriginal contestation of colonial commemorations. So the sense one gets when you first glance at that image is this is a book about the disruption of colonial monuments, which if you just stayed at that conclusion, you'd be a bit misled. It's really two books in one, I think, and the larger component of the book is about, in fact, the disruption that, and when I say us, we have done as settlers on Aboriginal society and culture. And the smaller component of the book is, in fact, the disruption that Aboriginal people resisting colonialism have wrought on colonialism. So I think that, yeah, that's a big takeaway for me for the book. In talking about today, just go to the next one, Nancy, please. I'll just talk briefly. There's a more extensive review on the book that I've written, which is available there in the journal Patterns of Prejudice, if any of you would like to look at that. But today I'll just borrow some of Bronwyn's slides that she used on Saturday and walk you through that to give you a bit of an idea of what went on. Beep. All right. So Bronwyn is Professor and Head of Department of Indigenous Studies, and she's also the Director of the Centre for Global Indigenous Futures at Macquarie University. She is quite an important figure in national scholarship. She's part of the recently launched Australian Council Centre of Excellence for the Elimination of Violence Against Women, and that comes on the tail of several Australia Research Council grants, the fourth, in fact. So it's an incredible track record, just to give you an idea of who Bronwyn is. She's the editorial board member of two prestigious journals and a fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. So we felt honoured to have Bronwyn there. Terry couldn't join us on the day, and I was very glad in presenting the book that I mentioned both authors, that I wasn't remiss to do that. Bronwyn later said that it's quite common for Terry to be left off the credits when settler historians or journalists or whoever talk about the book. She said, you know, as the Aboriginal woman, you know, it seems like I'm, you know, the only one here, and it's often as a target that she's represented in conversations like we're having today or in broader society. So yeah, that was fascinating that Terry had provoked Bronwyn into creating this book together with her, and Bronwyn agreed with Terry that it was a pretty important project to undertake. So I think really the big take home for this book is that these monuments are settler monuments. It's our mess and that we ought to clean it up. Next slide, please. And I mean, why do we go about creating these monuments? The thesis of the book really is that settlers have such tenuous claims to ownership of the continent that we need to construct this myth constantly through all types of commemoration, statues perhaps being the most visible. So, you know, these commemorative practices give the appearance of permanence or of deep roots in this place, which, you know, is quite laughable from an Indigenous point of view. Deep roots, 235 years compared to many tens of millennia. So, next slide, please. Bronwyn and Terry draw on Tony Birch, a professor from Melbourne University, who you may have heard of. So the thesis essentially comes from Tony, but they do really important work in, you know, applying that thesis and illustrating it through so many different examples of monuments around Australia and other commemorations. So there's a further provocation, next slide, Nancy, in the book that, and it's interesting actually that, sorry, your name was Ken. Ken started today with a disclaimer of his own, that he wasn't purporting to do a rigorous, you know, chronology of this power station. And Bronwyn began with a disclaimer, as she put it, that this is not a history project. And it's so fascinating for me as a fairly recent comer to history, from art history, that we feel obliged to give these disclaimers, that there's an expectation of you know, complete studies and so on. So Bronwyn's a sociologist and a scholar of Indigenous studies, and it really was cause for me to reflect on the fact that Bronwyn felt more allied to the fields of sociology than to history, that, you know, she talked about this idea of power and so on, that sociology really married quite nicely with Indigenous studies. And had we had more chance to chat, I would have liked to scratch the surface on why she didn't feel that historians perhaps were foremost in her mind as allies. So, yeah, I think I don't have much more to say about that, but yeah, that's where I'd like to leave it today in terms of discussion.
Thank you, Nick. And then we had a final panel discussion where we invited some of the speakers up to the front, and Irena was the host of that section, and we had some questions from the audience as well. Do you want to make some remarks about that, Irena?
Perhaps Yoni can make it because you were there. Well, I can make my part, right? It was a short discussion, and we were sure that it could be the case that it can become a very intense kind of conversation. It's just that the session has been kind of long enough, and we wouldn't want to expand it. And instead of that, kind of make it in little conversations that always pop up at the end of every session, right? But I'm totally agree with you, Johnny, and anyone that attend, that could be there kind of for hours, because in fact, we cut it in the precise moment when it became so kind of interesting, right? When the audience really, I think, feel comfortable part of the conversation. And so it made me feel a nice kind of close moment of a very beautiful afternoon, Saturday afternoon, right? So, but probably, Johnny, you as part of—
It's a very beautiful afternoon, yeah, because—
It was a beautiful, yeah.
Because Ken was there, and Ken was the sort of audience that needs to fill that room, because it was like these ideas about wrecking, you know, of dealing with this is going to go right to the heart. I mean, people commemorate things. They love history. They love trying to find all the wonderful things to support what people did, you know. But what was coming through that session was for Aboriginal people in this country, where we've had no education, where we've had no truth-telling, we've had nothing. These statues, it is very similar to a Jewish person, right, walking through an environment with statues to Himmler and Hitler, and we're all wondering, why don't you feel good? You know, I mean, these are the sorts of tragedies that they feel, that's the traumas they feel. And we feel sort of okay because we've only heard or we've only looked into sort of part of the history. The whole country itself needs some kind of method to work through these things. And it was beautiful because Ken asked the question halfway through, how can I celebrate Macquarie? And it was this tense moment where Bronwyn was sort of saying, well, you can celebrate Macquarie if you like. You know, and there was a bit of upset in the room, and then she came back and very compassionately, I thought it was very beautiful to see how she was, she understood that there was a problem here of dealing with where people are coming up. There's a lot to process in that one afternoon. I mean, I was going through, my head was sort of getting shot from one end to the other. I just thought it was fantastic, you know, but there's a fantastic technique for dealing with this, which came out of the con a few years ago. The Renaissance Italians, Stradella, composed these serenades for such public discussions. So where you're going to bring the public into uncomfortable discussions, you have someone give the argument of what's going on, get people upset, whatever it is, then have a break. You have some music so people can have a time to reflect, listen to what they've just had, calm down a little, have something to drink, cup of tea. And then the next session starts. You have another session of public engagement and debate about these difficult topics. So you mix the difficulty and the sort of, you know, the traumatic situations that are going to be brought up in these things with a bit of music and a bit of gaps, you know, to give people a chance. So you don't let everyone just leave the room thinking I may or may not have had expressed, or what did she mean by that, or what did he mean by that? You sort of work it through. But it would be a fantastic thing to consider, Nancy, whether you would want to sort of book out a room and do this properly with a performance piece. I mean, we could find these people who can organise such a thing. I always wanted to see it put into practice, but it was always...
And now we have an issue, yeah.
Yeah.
I agree, and I think this is part of the whole truth-telling process that has been going on for a long time and is going to have more attention over the next few years. It is hard to really see someone else's point of view, but the more that we get together and the more that we talk about it and so on, and you don't just see the end product of maybe someone with a spray can taking to a monument and you don't really know why, and they just look like a vandal. If you can understand it, then I think you use that analogy about Jewish people and Nazis, that's an extreme case, but that's the kind of situation that's going on. But I did just want to say also that Nicole Chappie in particular, with her work on the Warramai fishing tree, was really proposing, what is an Aboriginal monument and how would that work? And because there's a big thing going on now about, well, if there aren't enough statues, if all the statues are of white men, we need more statues. We need statues of women. We need statues of Indigenous people. But I'm not sure that that's the solution. I think we need to back up and think about, well, what are other things that we could regard as monuments? And there was discussion of living trees and of this tree that's now digitized and of monuments that actually have a social purpose and a use and not just things that we stand back from and treat with some sort of awe. So yes, I think there were great ideas circulating.
But also the fact that that eventually what is needed is this conversation, right? Because one of the things that we put in the room is whether, to Rowan in particular, but all of them in general, is whether or who should lead that, whether the shelter, what she called the shelter, or the coloners should lead she considered that it's important that the statues and the monuments are kind of removed and because they mean what they mean, right? Or whether it should be something that the Aboriginal people should lead. So then what the final kind of conversation that I don't take as a confrontation, but as a conversation is important, is that is because it's bringing the question to life, which is the conversation needs to happen. And the manner in which that needs to be done shouldn't be confrontational. It should be part of a decision together and a part of a conversation that needs to happen, right? So that's what I take with me. I think Johnny's suggestion, Nancy, is pretty good. So how can that be spun into a further conversation, right?
Yeah, okay.
I think it's a really good point.
And this last slide is just about what's next. And so we really did learn through the process, as I said before, that it's not too hard to digitize a statue. If you have a little bit of money and you can pay people who know how to do these things, that's doable. But manipulating it digitally is hard, and it's not something yet that's quite ready to just send out to the general public and say, look, here's a wonderful 3D reimagining of a statue, have a go at it and see what you think. Maybe you want to put a crown on top of James Fletcher's head. Maybe you do see him as a great hero of Newcastle and you would like to coat his statue in gold. And you could do all those things in our imagination. So we'll keep working on that technical side. But we also found that not all statues trigger a response. And the artists that we engaged, most of them said, you know, I didn't have any ill feelings towards James Fletcher. And so it was, you know, it was a little bit of a hard ask to think about how I might reimagine it, because I hadn't imagined him before this. So I think it really needs to be something genuine that comes out of community concern rather than academics saying, how about this statue, because it's there. But we'd like to keep working on this plan of trying to think of ways away from the sort of black and white, you know, tear it down or leave it where it is. Is there a middle ground, and could part of that solution be digital? And we're certainly seeking partners and ideas for future collaborations. So if there's anybody here who is responsible for statues or concerned about them, we'd be happy to hear from you. So thanks so much for listening.
Thank you very much, Nancy. Nicholas and Irene. Okay, so any
Oh, can I just say, Nancy, you said, you know, raise the issue of maybe monuments should be more practical. And of course, after World War II, they decided that instead of just doing what had been done after World War I, of having, you know, statues and honour rolls and that, they decided to make monuments more practical, which is how Newcastle got its cultural centre, and also baby health centres. For example, the one in Lambton Park is a Second World War memorial. Well, it's now a cafe, but it was a baby health centre.
Good point, Jude. And there were a lot of swimming pools built that way after World War II as well.
And there was that beautiful example that Bronwyn gave about that honey. I missed half, but I must have been going for the cake table. But she was talking about an example of what other types of monuments using. Did you remember that?
Yes, that was carved timber, and there's a beehive inside the statue. And the way she described it, the honey oozes out of the mouth of the.
There you go. So it's a living statue.
Just go along with your bread or something and put it out the
Yes, that's right.
Extract some honey. And that attracts people, and you're interested, and it's dynamic and so on, because that's another problem with a lot of the statues that we have, that they're just invisible because they haven't changed for 50 or 100 years and no one really cares about them anymore. So yeah, keeping it interesting is one aspect.
Thank you very much. I tracked down the composer who used to be in this university in the con with Stradella, and I'll see if she's still able to pull something together. Okay.
Sounds good.
Thank you very much, guys. Very that's work to be done yet. So thank you. All right. On to updates. So Katie Sentis from Special Collections is going to give us an update on the thesis digitisation project. the drawing workshops, and the upcoming exhibition on the Sun newspaper glass negatives. Katie, are you there?
One moment. Hello. Hi.
Cheers.
Oops. Hello. I'll just share my screen. Let's go for that one. Share. And then. Okay. Can you see that one?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to briefly have a chat about the thesis digitisation project and then give you some brief exhibition updates. So this year we started on the thesis digitisation project with the aim to digitise the hard copy theses we have in the collection. These date from 1954 to 2015. So basically these were created prior to the need to provide a digital copy to the university. So the idea is to digitise these and to eventually make them available on NOVA, the university's open access research repository. So we have approximately 4,000 hard copies in our collection, but for this year, the first phase of the project is to tackle the theses completed post 1995. To accomplish this, we have hired 3 student recruits who've been employed as casual library project assistants. You can see them there. That's Hongdi, Giverny and Hannah. They began on the 8th of May and will work through until December the 8th. Since they've started, we've digitised approximately 52 theses as of this moment. And at this current rate, we estimate that we should have close to 500 theses digitised by the end of the year. So the theses are being digitised with this new machine, which is set up in the GLAM lab called the Treventus Scan Robot. It's an automatic or semi-automatic book scanner and provides distortion-free homogeneous scanning with no curvatures, with equal and consistent focus and even page illumination. So the scanner basically creates the master TIFF files, which the students will then use to compile appropriate PDF files for the open access repository. Now for a few exhibition updates. So the Margaret Senior exhibition, as most of you know, is opened on the 8th of March. It's due to close on the 16th of June. So that's 2 weeks left to come up and visit the beautiful original artworks by Margaret Senior. As part of this exhibition, we had some activation events where we held 3 natural history illustration workshops, which were available free to students. These included exhibition tours and viewings of more of the Margaret Senior collection in the reading room. The students then went on to receive 2-hour drawing lessons from professional artist Trevor Weeks. So Trevor is a prolific artist and was the former head of natural history illustration at the university for many years. So we had a really great turnout and fantastic feedback from the students. We had about 10 to 15 students attend each workshop for the full 2 hours. So yeah, that was really great to see. And the students also got to draw from taxidermy specimens which were on loan from the specimen lab, which is currently at New Space. So the next exhibition is Glamour on Glass. This will be launched on the 28th of June at 2 p.m. The exhibition has been curated by our Vera Deakin intern, Isabel Whittle, and features images from the Newcastle Sun glass plate negative collection held by the library. The collection covers the early period of the newspaper's operations from its inception at the closing stages of World War I through to the Great Depression of the 1930s. The exhibition focus will be on photographic prints of fashion models in the Newcastle Sun and explores the impact of the Great Depression on fashion trends and garment production during the 1930s. Also on display will be items on loan from the Australian Museum of Clothing and Textiles, and includes accessories chosen by women of the 1930s to complement the fashions of the day. The exhibition, as I said, will open on the 28th, and Associate Professor Nancy Cushing is going to open it for us. Light refreshments will be served. So save the date and be sure to come and check it out. We'll be sending out email invitations to everyone this week. So yeah, and it will close on the 29th of September. So that's me for a brief update on what's happening in the exhibition space and on the digitisation project.
Thanks very much, Katie. Any questions?
I can just make a comment on, just for interest, my thesis is digitised and online on Nova, but when I wanted to organise to hand a hard copy of my thesis last year to the archives, they refused to take it. We don't take hard copies anymore. So just an interesting comment on the modern day.
Could I just raise something on that point too? And that is that I just checked my emails and I was approached in 2019 about having my 1995 thesis digitized. And I thought it was already well underway. Is this a project that's already partially done, or is it one that they pretended to be doing? Really
well, we just got the book scanner this year in January, so I think we're just starting on the bulk of it now. It was in its inception stages probably back in 2019. But now that we've
research support librarian Simone Cox in research support.
Yeah,
right.
Nancy, it's Sarah from the library here. I can definitely talk to that. So we identified 50 theses where we thought it was high chance that we'd get hold of the person the author of the thesis, for a bit of a trial. So you were probably contacted as part of that trial, where we can't really make them open unless we have permission. So we were trying to contact people who we were sure would come back to us and say, sure, put it online and you can make it openly available. So that was the trial, and I think there were only 50 people we contacted. I think that's the unspoken thing for Katie and the amazing work they're doing to digitise them. There will be quite a piece of work we have to do to try and contact the authors or the family of the authors where we can't get hold of the author, to try and get permission to put them up. And failing any ability to contact, we'll have to make a decision on how we handle those, because to me it seems such a wonderful idea to get them out there and in the open so they're discoverable, and this research can be used from anyone anywhere in the world. Yet, we also have to be mindful that some people might not want that. I don't know why, but that can be the case sometimes. So that's probably where you got contacted in 2019. I just arrived in the role and knew that this trial was going to happen. And now we've got the big machine. It's only taken us 3 years to summons the money from somewhere to get us this amazing robot, and away we go. Yeah.
I feel for the interns. There was a rate of 3 to 4 per day. And I'm just wondering, are they turning the pages manually, Katie?
No. So it's an automatic scanning machine. So if you're on site, come and check it out. It's being used right now. You can probably hear it in the background. So come down and check it out.
Okay, Robert.
Yeah, if I put my history hat on, I'd love if there were some priorities on some earlier theses which might be specific to do with the studies of the history of Newcastle. And I'm thinking in particular of one from about 1955, which was on the architecture of Wall's End, which has already been digitized. But is the project, are you open to someone looking through old stuff and picking out some books to slot in to your 500 rather than have to wait another couple of years?
Katie, do you want me to talk to that, or are you happy to?
Sure, go for it, Sarah.
So it's really tricky. I think with the Treventus, which is the robot, and I think we've called it Treventus. It can only digitise bound theses of a certain type, and then you've got to constantly monitor. So where you're talking about architecture ones, they might have these amazing great big fold outs and things, which when you're using a robot, it actually just sucks pages and flips them and sucks pages and flips them. So what we're trying to do is
like the real Travolta.
Yeah. What we're trying to do is get through the bulk of the ones that are really like that, those theses. There are some ones from way back which have like spiral binding and all of that sort of thing, which this machine simply won't do, that have to be manually digitized. So they might, it sounds to me like the ones that you're looking at might be a bit down the track. We're trying to do volume first, and then we'll very carefully do all those others that don't quite fit the box of these bound theses. Yeah.
Okay.
And you're quite welcome to see the robot Travolta in the GlamX lab in operation. Anyway, thank you, Katie, and thanks to the team for that update. And that exhibition looks really wonderful. Can't wait to see it. Okay, over to you, Mark Tregus, the chair of the Hunter Regional Committee of the National Trust, for an update.
Yeah, hi all. It's pretty busy in the heritage space at the moment. You may be aware there's been a heritage conservation review of Newcastle East and the city centre heritage conservation area. That have your say period closed last week. Basically, the City Council was asking the public to identify those streets, buildings and precincts they thought were important. And of greater concern, those streets, buildings and precincts they thought had very little heritage. National Trust concerned is they will probably excise part of the West End, probably almost everything west of Union Street. Consequently, we made over 80 comments on interactive mapping. We've also made a formal submission. The process will now take another 6 months. Ocean Bar Stage 2, they pulled down the Have Your Say for the Conservation Area Review and put up the Have Your Say for the Ocean Bars last Monday. Newcastle City Council envisages a new footprint, a new plan for the Ocean Bars, which has been there since 1911, and the buildings have been there since 1922. They envisage at the north end a large cafe of the size of 225 square metres, about 10 times the size of the current kiosk. The northern end is vulnerable to ocean waves, as you know. Next to that will be a community centre. Now, the community centre is being foisted upon the community of the 2300 postcode. Council claims that those who live in 2300 Cooks Hill, Newcastle, don't have their own district community centre. There's a lot of opposition to that. They also intend roofing the two 1922 open air change enclosures, the southern end and northern end. This represents the biggest change to the Ocean Bars in over 100 years. And it takes away that experience that most people have enjoyed for over 100 years, showering, taking that direct sunlight. At the same time, roofing the ocean bars are being done on the excuse that it reduces the threat from drone photography. Now, there are many ways to overcome that. The most positive thing is they intend introducing 4 to 5 non-gendered lockable change rooms at the southern end. We're okay with that, that's great. And for those who need privacy, or those parents of one gender who need to supervise kids of another gender, that accommodate those things. Council is also considering a second floor to the northern end. You might recall in December of 2019, January of 2020, 20,000 people signed a change.org petition opposing the black box. We believe today that what we're coming up with is another black box, and we're calling it the white elephant. The other great concern to us is this proposal. They're talking about this proposal costing tens of millions, we'd like to see a minimalist approach which conserve the barns as it is and may cost well under 10 million. And finally, Iris Capital City Centre East End project stages 3 and 4 is up for exhibition at the moment. This proposal sees the demolition of 11 buildings in the blocks surrounded by Thorn Street, New Common Street, King and Hunter Street. 4 of those buildings will be retained as facades only, and they'll be replaced with 4 large building footprint apartment buildings ranging from 8 stories to 11 stories. They're also advertising 2 penthouses on the top of those, being advertised for $22 million each off the plan. It's a substantial change. Unfortunately, when you have a look at the DA that's been on exhibition for the last 8 days, they forgot to put in the Statement of Heritage Impact. They forgot to post the Statement of Environmental Effects. There's actually nothing there other than physical plans. There's nothing to read. So hopefully we'll get another 2 weeks on top of this to make comment. That's all I have.
Thank you. 22 million. Wow. Okay. Any questions for Mark? Okay. Thank you very much, Mark. All right. Just any updates? Ron, do you have an update from the fort? There was a fantastic sculpture display up there a few weeks ago.
Yes, Johnny,
wondering how the there was people all over the place, and there's one statue I thought you should have retained. So
which one was that?
It was not to any person. Okay, it was that beautiful. The statue was on the, it was almost forgotten, but it was lined by the buildings. If you saw it from the point of view, it beautifully dovetailed in with your huts. It was a sort of funny little fella with a snake over the top of his head or something.
He's still actually sitting there. Don't know why he's still there.
I've got a great video I'll send to you.
The overall, there was something like 25,000 visitors in the fortnight. There was Graham Murray and his wife who put the money up and organised the whole process. They sold, I think it was 23 of the statues, including the one which was published this morning where the former Lord Mayor Jeff McCloy's business bought it, the large whale. It is going to be the landmark or a statue in front of a development they're doing at Turos Heads down south of Bateman's Bay. It will be staying at the fort for something like probably 6 to 7 months until they're ready with that thing. They have the Society received a substantial donation from the McCloys in relation to that, and they are paying the sculptor to help them disassemble it and take it to Turos Heads and to reassemble it when that occurs. The other thing that's going on at the fort, of course, is the King's birthday open day next Monday, where there'll be a flag raising ceremony and pipe bands and so on from about 10:30. Then there'll be, I think it's 7 guns we will have firing at 11, 1 and 3. And of course the large whale is still there as an attraction. And we're in the process of developing our medals and buttons and badges room in the new guardhouse, and Newcastle City Council have done a wonderful job in the recent weeks of painting the actual new guardhouse and the second cell. We'd painted one of the cells ourselves, but they've done the rest of it, and they've done a very good job. So we've now got an additional exhibition space, which we've got to think about what we're going to use it for. That about covers it all. Thanks, Johnny.
Thank you, Ron. Jude, you had an update from the Family History Society?
So I'm just forgotten whether you have heard already that Newcastle Family History Society has launched Volume 3 of their People of the Valley series. Ian's had the stories in there, so I've got a story about, in the latest one, about Alice Ferguson from Merewether, and Hazel Evans, who was more famous than Nobbies in her time. She was a pianist. And also tomorrow at 2 p.m. in the Old Mechanics Institute at Lambton, which is the Family History Society headquarters, Julie Keating is giving a talk about the AA company, which made a big impact in Newcastle. You can either go along the line or watch it on Zoom, and it's being recorded, so it'll be on the Family History website. So if anyone wants the Zoom address, maybe contact me before 2 p.m. tomorrow.
Great, thank you, Jude. Okay, we've had an opportunity from ABC. They've been running a series called The Person Behind the Place, and they've been asked after contributors who can do little 5-minute stints for them. And I've put a list up on our site. Now, Robert is going to talk to this because Robert's been very active in organising speakers for them. They're just looking for 5-minute slots to play in, is it the morning or the evening?
Morning.
Mornings, that's it, mornings. And they're looking for younger and fresher faces.
Is it radio?
Something over 60. And, anyway,
So
what do you want to...
they want historians, but they want them to be young.
Yes. Or people in...
They do it, so they're not too scrupulous with the young. I'm talking about James Fletcher to them.
I did contact someone to offer to talk about Rose Selwyn. Her Rose Street, Merewether, is named after her.
There you go. That's
but
one.
he never got back to me.
Yeah, well, he left. So there's someone else looking after it, Cara. So I said I'd raise it at the meetings and we'd get it together, a list of people that, and coordinated through Robert, of course. So Robert, do you want to say a few words about this, or? You have to unmute yourself, Robert. You're muted.
He's talking, but yes.
Oh, you're still muted.
Muted.
There you go.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So Paul Turton wants to run a session, and he's already started on places in Newcastle, like street names, and then to find out the story behind that place. So he approached Johnny, and Johnny approached me, and so I've done one already, which was on Dr. James Hill from Lambton, who was a surgeon in the colliery, in the Lambton colliery, but he went on to form a colliery out at Hillsborough, and he named Hillsborough after himself. So Paul Turton is apparently mad keen, and initially I thought this was just a couple of short things that would run for a few weeks, but his producer and Paul apparently want this session to go on and on for many, many months. So I see this as an opportunity for the members of the Hut of Living Histories to get some airplay for us, and it's relatively easy because you don't have to be an expert in any of this stuff. You can actually look it up online and almost read it out if you like. So it could be a park, it could be a suburb, it could be a street name. So I did Dr. Hill. Julie Keating did Thomas Crowdis, who gives us Crowdis Street in Lambton, Crowdis Road in Elmore Vale, and Crowdis Bay out at the Bay. Merrin Kilgour did Robert Kilgour, who was 7 times Mayor of Newcastle, and his name is in Kilgour Street in Merewether. So the format Paul uses, it's a mid-morning thing on a Monday, and he sort of says, well, here's the name of the place, this is where it is, and then he just wants a casual conversation where you sort of lead and talk about the history of the person behind it. Segment runs for about 10 to 15 minutes, which I actually said is a fraction long because, depending on the person. But for example, if someone here today decided that they might talk about Hannell and Hannell Street. There's probably plenty of information about Hannell that you can look up online and basically just read from your notes about Hannell, because he had fingers in many, many pies. The same with James Fletcher. But I have also suggested to Paul that there might be other places around where we really don't have a lot of information about the person behind it, because it might get to be a little bit boring. So I guess I'm saying to the group here today is if you know someone that might be an ancestor of yours, or someone that you just know that there's some information available on a particular person, go and look it up and write yourself something where you can talk for 5 or 10 minutes. These can be done over the telephone, either live, or Paul can pre-record it. And there's Kara's details at the bottom. So I think it'd be pretty good. And the comment about young people, sort of actually my critical observation as I get older and my kids start to say to me, well, every time you talk about history, you're always so boring. And I go, oh, okay, all right. And I sort of self-reflected on that and thought, yeah, because you get to my age and you go, well, I want the information to be thorough. I want it to be accurate and detailed. And the young people just hear, well, this is boring. I want it to be quicker. So I actually said to Johnny that I would say to this forum today that even history students or people in the library or people that you might know, young people have and bring energy to history that us older people don't always have. So and because a young person doesn't have to be expert on any of these, they can actually look it up and basically read it out. I guess I'm encouraging the younger generation to get involved in history if they can. So let me twist your arms now and say, anyone around the table now that would like to have a go at that, can you put your hand up and or send me a chat, and I'll just jot your names down. You don't have to tell me what the topic is, but I guess I'd like to go back to Kara and say, well, we asked the people today and there were 20 people attended, and I got 10 people to nominate. Okay, go for it. I'll unshare now and just drop me a chat and tell me that you're willing to do something. Ken Schilling has said that he is going to talk about Christie Place in Newcastle and also Ranclawd Street in Merriweather. So Ken has offered to do too. So we've got some people already. Yeah, okay.
And I think the one reason I wanted to do Rose Street in Merriweather is I suspected, and so far been proved right, that most of the names would be males. And so I think it would be good
to seek out those
to do Rose Selwyn.
Yeah.
Yep.
And they've also done a program on why there aren't that many First Nations people. So that's something that, I mean, this could be an exercise in also having a look at your backyard and seeing who is commemorated and who isn't. So. Oh,
actually, that's a good point, because I think there's a park in Lake Macquarie. I can't remember the woman's name, but it's named after an Awabakal woman. Yeah. I might actually have some info.
I served on a committee at Steel River for 2 years, and one of the women that lived there was Ellen Lane, who was related to Vera, and she was a fantastic woman. And so when BHP were looking for names, I suggested Ellen Lane. I mean, it's a perfect name. That was the name, Ellen Lane. They wanted the names after Ellen. And they said, oh, no, we're going to pick an AA company guy. I said, the AA company's been done to death. Every single, they've got, I live in a street with the AA company solicitor. Everyone's been done, through the AA company. So we've had enough AA company. We need a few more women.
This is what Bronwyn was talking about. Yeah. I mean, we're so obsessed with memorialising all these names.
I know, but they're dredging the bottom of the barrel. Can we find who was the type? I don't know, someone obscure in the AA company that we can name a street after when there are probably others.
As an example, out of Cameron Park, one of my sons lives on Jupiter Circuit, and I had no idea what that meant, but apparently the streets out there are named after early ships in Newcastle, and the Jupiter was a ship, and there's a photo of the Jupiter ship. So no one out there, to my knowledge, knows the origin of Jupiter Circuit.
Yeah. All right. We're going to find out your streets and get in touch with Robert. And let's get this stuff happening.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Quickly now. Thank you. The Collect exhibitions started at the lockup. Incredible launch on the 2nd of June. NAIDOC Week this year is for our elders and starts on July 2nd to the 9th. If you want to listen to radio tonight, John Whitty, you're going to be on Radio on Drive this afternoon. Is that correct? Is this the beginning of what are they commemorating this week? John, is it LGBTIQ week or something?
It'll be probably Pride Month.
Pride Month, that's it. You would add something. You'll be on radio, do you know when?
5:30.
5:30, okay, listen in for John.
I'll be listening.
Bob, sorry, go ahead.
No, it's I turn up at 5:30. I don't know when the show is.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Anytime from 5:30. Bob, did you have an update from Del Pratt's Cottage at all?
Bob. Is that Bob?
Bob Donaldson? Bob Donnelly. One of the Bobs.
Yeah, not Bob.
Did I get any of those surnames right? Anyway, and Q&A is coming from Newcastle tonight. It starts at 9:30 p.m. So, and I think that's about it until next month. And next month will be dedicated to the Hannon Photographic Archive. So we should have a panel discussion with the founders, as well as updates from work integrated learning students that's doing the digitisation, and Dr. Amir Mogadam's doing the conservation. So if you're interested.
When will that be on?
July the 3rd, our next Hunt of Living
Oh,
History.
right. Oh, sorry, yes.
Okay. Anyone have anything burning to say before I shut this thing down?
Yes, Margaret's Bay at out past across from Swansea is named after Margaret of the Wobbicle. She's well-known Aboriginal woman from this area. So that's another Aboriginal woman's name.
So maybe if we can track down a few more women, that would be fantastic for the show.
I'll let Robert know.
Yes. All right. Well, look, thank you very much for making the time to join us this afternoon. I hope it's been informative for you. And thank you very much for being in the room and keeping us company. So anyway, I bid you all farewell and see you next month. Stay safe and stay well. Bye-bye.
Yes, John. Thank you.
We did it.